They're not united like they keep lying and pretending to be. Half of the players are ready to sign the deal that the WNBA laid on the table. Meanwhile, the WNBPA is going and sending out proposals that the players don't even give a damn about because they are willing to sign what is already on the table. We already.
The reality right now is that the WNBA is not nearly as united as the public image suggests. Behind the scenes, there's a growing divide between the players themselves, the union leadership, and the league's ownership. A significant portion of players are reportedly willing to sign the deal that has already been presented. Meanwhile, the WNBPA continues submitting counterproposals that many players themselves are not strongly aligned with. At this stage, the negotiations have reached a critical turning point. The tone has shifted completely. What once looked like routine collective bargaining has now become a high-stakes power struggle between billionaire ownership and union leadership determined to push for a larger share of revenue. For months, the WNBPA leadership has taken a hard stance. Strike threats were discussed. Demands were made for a significantly larger percentage of league revenue. Union leaders positioned themselves as essential pillars of the league's value, operating under the assumption that ownership would ultimately concede rather than risk damaging the league's momentum. But ownership did not respond the way many expected. Instead of backing down, the owners evaluated the financial structure, the long-term media deals, and the massive surge in ratings driven by new stars entering the league. Their response has been firm. The offer stands, and the league is prepared to move forward regardless of whether every veteran agrees to the terms. This approach represents a classic high-leverage negotiation tactic. Ownership believes the current proposal already represents a historic increase in player compensation relative to the league's financial history. From their perspective, the union's counterproposal, reducing their revenue demand by only a small margin, did not meaningfully close the gap between the two sides. Union leadership, including figures such as Nneka Ogwulike and Breonna Stewart, continues to advocate for a larger share, arguing that the league's growth and new television agreements justify increased player participation in revenue. Ownership, however, is evaluating leverage differently. There is increasing discussion about contingency plans if negotiations fail. Historically, professional sports leagues have used replacement players during labor disputes, most notably during the 1987 NFL strike. In that situation, owners temporarily filled rosters with replacement talent, weakening the union's negotiating power. The WNBA now faces a similar theoretical scenario, though the circumstances are unique. One of the most significant factors in the league's recent growth has been the arrival of Caitlyn Clark. Her impact on television ratings, ticket sales, and merchandise has been substantial. She has attracted a massive new audience to the league, changing the economic landscape almost overnight. Ownership understands this.
Bottom stars to mid-tiers to young players on rookie contracts, and it's up to them to look out for the best interests of all of their clients, not just the people that are getting max contracts, not just the rookies, all of their clients. And they don't appreciate the lack of transparency with the WNBPA. They also said they would like input on a survey that was to be sent out to players. And the WNBPA went ahead and sent the damn counter proposal without even giving them the chance to have input into a survey that was being sent out to the players. It's complete nonsense. It's a clown show. What is going on with this WNBPA? Therefore,
dynamic. The league's recent media deal, valued in the billions, reflects growing broadcaster confidence in the WNBA's future. That future is increasingly tied to new stars, younger players, and expanding fan interest. This has shifted leverage in a fundamental way. Many agents representing players are now closely monitoring the situation. Their responsibility is to protect the long-term careers and earning potential of their clients. A prolonged labor dispute introduces risk, not just financial risk, but career risk. Roster spots are limited, and professional sports always operate on replacement pressure. For veteran players, this creates a particularly difficult decision. They must balance the pursuit of improved long-term compensation with the immediate reality of roster security and income stability. Meanwhile, players like Caitlyn Clark operate under a different financial structure. Her earnings extend far beyond her WNBA salary, including major endorsement partnerships, sponsorship deals, and global marketing opportunities. This reduces her financial dependence on league salary compared to many other players. Ownership is aware of these economic realities. Their current strategy suggests they are prepared to hold firm on their offer, believing that market forces and internal player pressure will ultimately push negotiations toward resolution. The upcoming deadlines represent key milestones. Decisions made in the coming weeks will shape not only the upcoming season, but the long-term financial structure of the league itself. At its core, this situation represents a classic labor negotiation. Ownership seeking cost control and structural stability, and players seeking a larger share of growing revenues. Both sides believe they hold leverage. Both sides believe time is on their side. But ultimately, the outcome will determine how power, revenue, and opportunity are distributed in the next era of the WNBA. The decision now rests with the players and the union leadership, whether to accept the current framework, continue negotiating for improved terms, or risk escalating the standoff further. The future direction of the league depends on what happens next.
For if the WNBPA continues to be delusional and, just out of their mind, okay? So March 10 would be the drop dead date. It would take up until March 31st for the legal to get sorted out with the attorneys and everything for a contract to be signed March 31st. Okay, the day after that, on April 1st, now this ain't April Fool's, y'all, okay? On April 1st, the Portland Fire and Toronto Tempo would receive the protected players list.
The decision now rests with the players and the union leadership, whether to accept the current framework, continue negotiating for improved terms, or risk escalating the standoff further. But what makes this situation even more complex is that this is not just a negotiation about percentages. This is a negotiation about control. It is about defining who truly holds the power in the modern WNBA. For decades, the league operated under a fragile financial model. It survived not because it was massively profitable, but because ownership groups believed in its long-term potential. They invested despite annual losses. They funded operations. They absorbed financial risk. And in return, they maintained structural authority over how the league functioned. Now, for the first time in the league's history, that balance is being challenged at a moment when the financial outlook is finally beginning to improve. The players see the rising television ratings. They see the sold-out arenas. They see the increased sponsorship deals. They see the media attention. And naturally, they believe they deserve a larger share of the revenue they are helping generate. From their perspective, this is not greed. This is correction. This is long overdue compensation for decades of underpayment relative to their contribution to the sport. But ownership sees a different picture. Ownership sees decades of financial losses that have not yet been fully recovered. They see operational costs that continue to rise. They see travel expenses, facility investments, marketing costs, and infrastructure development that must be maintained regardless of short-term revenue spikes. They see risk, and they see uncertainty about whether the current surge in popularity will sustain itself long-term. This difference in perspective is at the heart of the conflict. Ownership is negotiating based on historical risk and financial caution. The union is negotiating based on projected growth and future potential, and those two timelines do not align. What makes this even more volatile is the internal division among the players themselves. Not every player is in the same financial position. Not every player has the same leverage. Not every player has the same priorities. Rookie contract players often have limited bargaining power. Their salaries are fixed under structured agreements. Their careers are just beginning. For them, stability and opportunity are critical. The ability to secure roster spots, develop their skills, and establish long-term careers may outweigh the potential benefits of pushing aggressively for revenue restructuring. Mid-tier players face a different challenge. They rely heavily on their WNBA salaries as a primary source of income. Unlike global superstars with major endorsement deals, their financial stability depends on the league operating consistently. A canceled season or prolonged labor dispute would have immediate and severe consequences for their livelihoods. Veteran players, especially those nearing the end of their careers, face perhaps the most difficult calculation of all. This may be their final opportunity to negotiate improved compensation. They may never see another collective bargaining agreement. For them, this negotiation represents their last chance to secure long-term financial gains before retirement. These competing priorities create internal pressure within the union itself, because while the union negotiates collectively, the consequences are deeply individual. Agents representing players understand this reality clearly. Their responsibility is not ideological, their responsibility is practical. They must evaluate risk versus reward. They must advise their clients based on long-term career sustainability, not short-term emotional momentum. And increasingly, agents are recognizing the danger of escalation because ownership has options. There's an entire pipeline of talent waiting for opportunity. Every year, hundreds of elite college players graduate, hoping to secure professional roster spots. Many never get the chance. International players compete globally for limited positions. Overseas leagues continue to develop strong talent pools. The supply of professional-level basketball talent continues to grow. Ownership understands this labor-supply dynamic. Professional sports, at their core, operate on replacement pressure. This is not unique to the WNBA. This is true in every major sports league. Talent is valuable, but it is also constantly renewing. That reality strengthens ownership's negotiating position, because while stars are irreplaceable, rosters as a whole are fluid. This brings the focus back to the league's most powerful economic driver, star power. The emergence of Caitlyn Clark has fundamentally altered the league's economic equation. Her presence has drawn unprecedented attention. Television ratings surged, merchandise sales increased dramatically, social media engagement exploded, attendance records were broken across multiple arenas. This is not speculation, this is measurable impact. Broadcast partners analyze viewership data closely. Advertisers evaluate audience engagement metrics. Sponsors track brand visibility and consumer response. And all of those indicators showed significant increases associated with Clark's entry into the league. This created new revenue opportunities.
It strengthened the league's media bargaining position. It increased franchise valuations. It attracted new sponsors. It expanded the audience demographic. Ownership sees this as validation of their long-term investment strategy. But it also changes leverage dynamics inside labor negotiations, because when a league's growth becomes strongly associated with emerging stars, ownership may feel less dependent on established veterans as a collective bargaining force. This does not mean veterans lack value. Their experience, leadership, and skill remain critical components of team success. But from a purely economic standpoint, growth driven by new audience acquisition shifts negotiating leverage toward ownership's long-term development strategy. This is the structural reality shaping the current standoff, and time plays a critical role. Deadlines create pressure, contracts require resolution, season schedules cannot remain uncertain indefinitely. Broadcast agreements require programming commitments. Arenas require scheduling coordination. Uncertainty creates financial risk for everyone involved. Ownership understands this pressure. The union understands this pressure, and both sides are attempting to use time strategically. Ownership may believe that as deadlines approach, financial pressure on players will increase motivation to accept existing terms. The union may believe that the risk of public relations damage, broadcast disruption, and fan frustration will pressure ownership to improve their offer. This is strategic patience. This is leverage through endurance. But endurance carries risk. If negotiations collapse entirely, the consequences would extend far beyond a single season. Fan trust could be damaged, momentum could be slowed, broadcast relationships could be strained. Sponsors could reconsider investment timelines. Player careers could be disrupted. League growth could temporarily stall. No one benefits from total collapse, which is why, despite the aggressive posturing, both sides continue communicating. Negotiations rarely move in straight lines. They move through phases: public positioning, private discussion, strategic leaks, counter-proposals, internal reassessments, incremental concessions. Progress often appears invisible until suddenly agreement is reached. But one undeniable truth remains: the WNBA is no longer negotiating from a position of survival. It is negotiating from a position of growth, and growth changes everything. Because when growth enters the equation, the stakes increase, expectations increase, and the fight over who controls the future becomes far more intense. Players are no longer negotiating simply to sustain the league. They are negotiating to define their share of its expansion. Ownership is no longer negotiating simply to preserve operations. They are negotiating to protect their investment during a critical growth phase. This is the transition point between survival and scale, and transitions are always turbulent. Every major professional sports league has experienced similar moments in its history, moments when growth created tension, moments when labor and ownership collided over how to distribute new wealth, moments when the structure of the league itself was reshaped through negotiation conflict. The WNBA is now experiencing its version of that moment, and how it resolves will shape the league for decades. Because collective bargaining agreements do not just determine salaries, they determine revenue-sharing models. They determine salary caps. They determine roster sizes. They determine contract structures. They determine free agency rules. They determine the balance of power between labor and management. They determine the economic DNA of the league. This is why both sides are fighting so intensely. This is not about a single season. This is about the next era. Ownership wants cost predictability and structural stability. Players want compensation proportional to revenue growth. Both positions are rational. Both positions are strategic. Both positions reflect competing interpretations of fairness and risk. And somewhere between those positions lies the eventual compromise. Because compromise is inevitable. Professional sports leagues do not function without players. Players do not have leagues without ownership infrastructure. They are interdependent, and interdependence ultimately forces resolution. But resolution does not mean equality of leverage. It means alignment of incentives. Ownership must ensure profitability and sustainability. Players must ensure fair compensation and career opportunity. When those incentives align, agreements are reached. Until then, pressure continues. Deadlines approach, decisions loom, and the future of the league remains suspended between competing visions of control, value, and growth. The outcome will not just determine salaries, it will determine power, it will determine influence, it will determine who shapes the future of professional women's basketball. And as negotiations continue behind closed doors, one thing is certain: the era of passive acceptance is over. The era of financial accountability has begun, and the decision that comes next will define everything that follows. What makes the coming weeks even more decisive is the quiet shift happening beneath the surface. Publicly, both sides continue to present controlled, professional messaging. Official statements remain measured. The language remains diplomatic.
Words like constructive, ongoing, and productive are used repeatedly, but beneath that carefully managed exterior, the strategic calculations are accelerating. Because negotiations are not just happening at the union leadership level, they're happening inside locker rooms, they're happening between players and agents, they're happening inside ownership boardrooms, they're happening inside broadcast network offices. Every stakeholder connected to the league is evaluating risk, leverage, and timing. Players are asking themselves difficult questions. How long can they afford uncertainty? How confident are they that the union can secure significantly better terms? How much risk are they willing to take with their own careers? Because every professional athlete understands one fundamental truth: careers are finite, opportunity windows are short, income potential is limited by